Thank you. We do not have a handout per se for this morning, so I'd like to say whatever ones you received who are in the Zoom world, you probably got one. I'm gonna save that and use it next week, if that's all right. I think we have a lot to talk about this morning, and I'd like to get your all's thoughts. As Bob starts to get ready to show it, it's a 17-minute video in TED Talk from Washington DC area. I believe it's Tyson's Corner is the name of it. About 7 or 8 years ago, you'll hear some datedness as we move into it. The speaker is Navajo. His name is Mark Charles. He's going to give us a little bit of his background, fascinating story. He talks about that in his book, which I've been passing around. You're welcome to look at it. It's called Unsettling Truths: The Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. So I'm choosing my ideas from that. So anything you don't like, blame it on the book, okay? We're ready. Here we go. Oh, shit.
Yak A. Mark Charles Inishya. Sin Bake Denan Nishlin to Tohiglini Bashichin.
Mayor and Clee, can y'all hear us in Zoomland? Can you see it?
We can hear you, but it's someone's email that we see.
Someone's email.
Hey, Copus.
Let me check that.
Well, wow.
Sure.
While Bob is checking on this, we knew we'd have some technical problems because we've not tried to share screen in this class while we are all online. So we'll be patient with that. One of the things that you will be listening to in the next few minutes, in the next few weeks, I hope to discuss. Go ahead, Jim.
All right. And Tyson, you see that, everyone?
Yak A. Mark Charles Inishya. Sin Bake Denan Nishlin to Tohiglini Bashichin. Sin Bake Denan Bashiche to Tohichitni Bashanella. In the Navajo culture, when you introduce yourself, you always name your 4 clans. We're a matrilineal people, and our identities come from our mother's mother. Now, my mother's mother happens to be American of Dutch heritage, and so I say Sin Bake Denan Nishlin, which translated means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Sin Bake Denan. And my fourth clan, my father's father, is Tohichitni, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. Before I go any further, I want to first acknowledge that we are on the land of the Pamunkey, the Haudenosaunee, and the Piscataway. These are the tribes that lived here. They raised their families here, they hunted here, they fished here, they farmed here, they buried their ancestors here. These were the people who had society and life here long before Columbus got lost at sea. These were the tribes that were ethnically cleansed and removed from these lands so that the state of Virginia, the District of Columbia, and the state of Maryland could be founded. And I like to acknowledge the people whose land I'm standing on wherever I go around the country. First, just to honor them and to thank them for the years they've stewarded these lands. And second, to remind myself, to remind us to be more humble as we walk on these lands, acknowledging that there is a story that goes beyond the history that we've read and that we're taught in our schools. In his final State of the Union, President Obama was talking about the need in our nation for new politics. And he said, we the people. Our Constitution begins with these 3 simple words. Words we've come to recognize mean all the people. Now, when I heard that, as a Native man, I had to stop and ask when. I've read our founding documents, I've studied our history, I see the current political environment, and I had to question, when did we decide as a nation that we the people actually means all the people? Let me demonstrate. Invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his and to their use and profit. These are the words of Pope Nicholas V in a papal bull written in 1452. Now, this papal bull, along with other papal bulls written between 1452 and 1493, collectively are known as what we call the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are subhuman and their lands are yours for the taking. This is literally the doctrine that let European nations go into Africa, colonize the continent, and enslave the people. They didn't believe them to be human. This is the same doctrine that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, land in this new world, which was already inhabited by millions, and claimed to have discovered it. If you think about it, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. If you don't believe me, leave your cell phones, your smartphones, your car keys, your laptops out. I'll come by and discover them for you. Clearly, this is not discovery, right? This is stealing, this is conquering, this is colonizing. The fact that to this day we have a national holiday honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America reveals the implicit racial bias of the nation, which is that indigenous peoples, people of color, are not fully human. So this makes the doctrine of discovery a systemically white supremacist doctrine that assumes the dehumanization of indigenous peoples. Now, the challenge is what our founding fathers have done with this doctrine throughout our nation's history. So in 1763, King George drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains, and he said to the colonies that were here that they no longer had the right of discovery of the empty Indian lands west of Appalachia. This upset the colonies. They wanted access to those lands. So a few years later, they wrote a letter of protest. In their letter, they accused the king of raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. They went on in their letter to state that he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. They signed their letter on July 4th, 1776. Literally 30 lines below the statement, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages, making it very clear the only reason our founding fathers used this inclusive term, all men, because they had a very narrow definition of who was actually human. This, of course, makes our Declaration of Independence a systemically white supremacist document that assumes the dehumanization of indigenous peoples. Now, a few years later, our founding fathers wrote another document. They started this one with the words, "We the people of the United States." This, of course, is the preamble to the Constitution. However, if you read just a few lines later, down to Article 1, Section 2, Article 1, Section 2 is the section of the Constitution that defines who is and who is not covered by this Constitution, who is and who is not a part of this union. If you read Article 1, Section 2, the first thing you will note is it never mentions women. This is important because if you read the entire Constitution from preamble through the 27th Amendment, you will find that there are 51 gender-specific male pronouns in regards to who can run for office, who can hold office, even who is protected by this document. 51 he, him, and his, and not a single female pronoun. So we first have to note, Article 1, Section 2 never mentions women. Second, it specifically excludes natives. And third, it counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. So who's left? Well, white landowning men is who could vote. Now, we have to ponder this for a moment. The reason our Constitution was written, the purpose of our Constitution is to protect the interests of white landowning men. So today, we act shocked that women earn 70 cents to the dollar. This shouldn't shock us. Our Constitution is working. We act surprised that our prisons are filled with people of color. This shouldn't surprise us. Our Constitution is working. We act outraged that in 2010, the Supreme Court sided with Citizens United and rules that corporations now have the same rights to political free speech as individuals. This is what opens the door for super PACs, unlimited contributions to candidates. This shouldn't surprise us. The Constitution's doing exactly what it was designed to do, is protecting the interests of white landowning men. So this makes our Constitution a systemically white supremacist and sexist document that assumes the white landowning male has the authority to decide who is and who is not human. Now, about 50 years later, we had a Supreme Court case. This is Johnson versus McIntosh. It's two men of European descent. They're litigating over a single piece of land. One of them got the land from a native tribe. The other one got the same piece of land from the government, and they wanted to know who owned it, who had the right to sell the land. The case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. This is the Marshall Court, and they had to decide the principle upon which land titles were based. So they ruled that the principle was that discovery gave title to the land. And then they go on to reference the doctrine of discovery and rule that natives who were here first but are less than human, we only have what's called the right of occupancy to the land, like a fish would occupy water or a bird would occupy the air. And Europeans have the right of discovery to the land, the fee title to the land, and therefore they are the true title holders. This, of course, creates the legal precedent for land titles, this and a few other cases between the 1820s and 1830s. And this precedent and the doctrine of discovery are referenced by the Supreme Court in 1954, in 1985, and most recently in 2005. Now I want to talk about this 2005 case for a moment. So in 1998, the Oneida Indian Nation purchased some of their traditional lands on the open market. They paid full price for them in the state of New York, which is where they traditionally resided, and they wanted to exercise their traditional sovereignty over these lands, which would mean they were not taxable. Now, the city of Sherrill, which is where the lands resided, they wanted the tax revenue from these lands, and so they sued the Oneida Indian Nation in federal district court. The Oneida Indian Nation won that case, and the city of Sherrill appealed to the Federal Court of Appeals. The decision was upheld, and so they appealed to the Supreme Court. The case was heard in 2005, and in arguing this case, the court actually reversed the rulings of the lower courts, and in the first footnote of the case, when they're setting precedent, they reference the doctrine of discovery. They then go on to argue that given the Oneida's long delay in seeking judicial relief, we hold that the tribe cannot unilaterally revive its ancient sovereignty. They then go on to argue that it is impossible to rescind the cession and restore the Indians to their former rights because the lands have been open to settlement, which is white settlement, and large portions of them are now in the possession of innumerable innocent purchasers. Now, in the original 1823 Supreme Court cases, John Marshall is building his case. He actually refers to natives as savages. And he says, but the tribes of Indians inhabiting this country were fierce savages, whose occupation was war, and whose subsistence was drawn chiefly from the forests. To leave them in possession of their country was to leave the country a wilderness. Now, in 2005, the court makes almost the same argument. It says, moreover, the properties here involved have greatly increased in value since the Oneidas sold them 200 years ago. Notably, it was not until lately that the Oneidas sought to regain ancient sovereignty over land converted from wilderness to become parts of city like Sherrill. This is the same argument John Marshall was making. It's just not using the word savages. So the Supreme Court then concludes that we now reject the unification theory of the Oneida Indian Nation and the United States, and hold that the standards of federal Indian law, which again, in footnote 1, is based on the doctrine of discovery, and the federal equity practice preclude the tribe from rekindling the embers of sovereignty that long ago grew cold. This is quite possibly the most white supremacist Supreme Court decision written in my lifetime. And it was written and delivered by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You see, white supremacy is a bipartisan value, and we don't know what to do with that. In 2016, Donald Trump won the US presidency by campaigning with a promise to make America great again. Not to be outdone, Hillary Clinton responded and told her supporters that America's great already. In October 2016, in the third presidential debate, she expanded and said, America is great because America is good. And Donald Trump concurred. He said, I agree with her. I agree with everything she just said. See, they both had a broad base of agreement. They both agreed our past, our history, which included the enslavement of African people and the genocide of Native peoples, and our foundations, which are based on the doctrine of discovery and the lie of white supremacy. They both agreed those things were great. They disagreed if we were great in 2016. Donald said no and Hillary said yes. See, we were duped. Many of us thought that the 2016 election was about racism versus anti-racism, equality versus inequality. What we were actually deciding on as a nation was, did we want Donald Trump to make America explicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist again, or did we want Hillary Clinton to work on our behalf to keep our white supremacy and racism implicit? And we didn't know what to do with that. It's easier to call out that candidate, to demonize that Supreme Court nominee, to oppose that particular politician, than it is to deal with our foundations. Why? Because our foundations are what prop up our land titles. See, we would rather believe that the United States of America is racist and sexist and white supremacist in spite of our foundations. But the truth is we are white supremacist, racist, and sexist as a nation because of our foundations, and we don't know what to do with that. African Americans and women will never be included as equal until we deal with the racism and sexism embedded in our foundations. Native Americans, my people, will never be included in We the People until as a nation we deal with the doctrine of discovery and our dehumanizing legal precedent for land titles. There's an Aboriginal leader named George Erasmus, and he says where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, he says, you have to start by creating a common memory. I think this quote is brilliant, and it gets to the heart of our nation's problem with race, which is we don't have a common memory. We have a white majority that remembers a history, a mythological history of discovery, expansion, exceptionalism, and opportunities. And we have communities of color that have the lived experience of stolen lands, broken treaties, slavery, Jim Crow laws, boarding schools, ethnic cleansing, genocide, Indian removal, internment camps, segregation, mass incarceration, and families separated at our borders. We have no common memory, and I think we all can agree that community on a national level is absolutely in the pits. I'm proposing that the United States of America needs a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. A conversation on par with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that took place in South Africa, in Rwanda, and in Canada. I would call ours Truth and Conciliation, because reconciliation implies there was a previous harmony. And I think we need it sooner rather than later. My goal is 2021. Tonight, we are talking about legacy. The Iroquois did not just look 7 generations into the future. They looked 7 generations into their past. They understood that they were a part of a vast transgenerational community. And this is my challenge to you tonight. If we can learn from the wisdom of our indigenous hosts who have been stewarding these lands for hundreds, even thousands of years, if we can acknowledge the vile racism, sexism, colonialism, and white supremacy that our founding fathers embedded deep into our foundations, and if we can pivot, we might just be able to leave a different legacy for our children's, grandchildren's, grandchildren's, grandchildren. A legacy that for the first time, we the people might actually mean all the people. Thank you very much.
people back on the screen, just a second, there they are. The floor is open to anyone who would like to say anything. John?
That was brilliant.
Thank you, John.
So, so I know everybody says, happy Independence Day, right? But coming from his perspective, I don't really celebrate Independence Day, right? It's colonialism, trending on my social media, who are all majority Native Americans. They all said merciless Indian savages, right, in quotes. Trying to bring that up because, it's still lingering, do I consider myself American? Yes, but then first and foremost, Navajo, or Navajo Nation.
Would you just tell people your name and your origin?
Oh, I'm Will, and I'm from the Navajo Nation. The guy who talks, we're related, so he's my brother by clan. So we're both Toadini. Yeah.
Ellen?
Yeah, I was just gonna make the point, I was really struck by how he took it back into having to. Naming a common memory and common mythology. And how I've been reading this book called Antigone Rising, and it talks about how the different myths from the Greek and Romans. For example, the story of Antigone was a young girl who defied her father and was murdered for it. And that was a play early on, and even before most people even had knew to read or write, basically. And so these things are so embedded in, this violence against women. It just goes back, so I feel like we need to re-examine all of these deeply embedded myths that we carry around with us without even being conscious of them. And I love how he said, how he went 5 generations forward, because it's not an easy task to change this stuff, and it probably won't happen in our lifetime, but can plant those seeds of, and grow something new in our country.
Thank you.
Oh, excuse me.
Go ahead, Alex.
When we talk about the Doctrine of Discovery and Manifest Destiny, we did I did believe it was last week. I was reading an article a few days ago about conquest of Hawaii. Okay, and that Manifest Destiny was used to conquer Hawaii and the Philippines and Guam, and was the reason that Japan was given Korea. But that's a long story, but Teddy Roosevelt. So
Thank you for mentioning it. You want to comment on any of that?
Well, I just think that, there's a lot of talk right now about rewriting history. And I agree we need to rewrite history, but not in the way that our current trend seems to be, which is to make it even more white supremacist. I think we need to rewrite our history honestly and talk about the ways in which we have deeply harmed so many people. And hopefully learn from that and begin to really develop a common history and way of doing that really does include all people.
Bobette.
There we go. Well, it's a stunning presentation, and it weaves together themes that we've talked about in the past, but puts it in a very clear challenge to what are we going to do now, and how do we look 7 generations behind, and we're working on that, but 7 generations ahead. And it's will be difficult because it's a challenge to landowners and income and what they plan to pass on to children. It's a challenge to white supremacists who are afraid of losing their control and their identity. That is their identity. And but it's a worthy goal and is well worth challenging. So thank you for presenting that. I'm still stunned. I think that's awesome. I want to hear it again. So I'm glad you're recording. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Bob. And I'll be glad to send that link to that YouTube to anybody that wants to show it. Michael,
Yes, I just want to ask the question, what do you expect out of an empire? Especially one from the 1500s. It seems like we're trying to apply modern day cultural thinking on what happened 250 years ago or more, 1,000 years ago or more. And I agree, it was all very bad. But again, I'm asking, what do you expect and what are you going to do about it? Are you honestly going to say that we're going to take thousands of acres of land from various states and just give it away? So I agree, it was all very bad. What do you expect? Especially out of empire. We talk about natives. If you look at the Aztec Indians, the Aztec tribe community, they conquered 400 other tribes, used them as slaves and as human sacrifices. But everybody admires Aztecs. So I'm having a problem with the spin that we're trying to put on this. I agree, it was horrible. But what are you going to do about it? And what do you expect?
That was exactly what made it so difficult for the United Nations to come up with a Declaration of Rights for Native Americans, indigenous people. I'll get the words right here in a minute. The issue you bring up of, are you going to give land back to the groups that originally lived on those lands? That was the fear of the United States, of England, of Canada, and Australia. They were the ones who really held out until long after it had been established before they finally agreed with it. And it was basically over that issue of, are we going to turn everything back over to the people that it belonged to in the first place? But I think there are other issues that we can address. And I think that's definitely a starting point. Instead of immediately going to, oh my gosh, I have to give my land back. Let's start with, oh my gosh, these are human beings that we have dehumanized for centuries. And let's start changing that.
I see two hands up. John, you disappeared. We can come back to you in a few minutes. Okay, go ahead, John. Peace be with you, brother.
Peace with you. I would like to rhyme and resonate with what Michael and Beth just said. What are we going to do about it? How can we go forward and make good, make whole, restitution, reparation for all the wrongs that have been done in the past? It's impossible, difficult, but we need to try to do our best. I'd like to acknowledge that the land I'm on right now in Iowa City is the seized territory of the Iowa, Sauk, and Meskwaki and the Kickapoo people. And, this in my mind, this is land that was stolen from them by the settlers. Of course, those people probably did take the land from other tribes. So that's been the sequence. And I would just like to finish real quick that this presentation and discussion right now is true an effort in the direction of truth and conciliation, uh, which is what we need to do right now going forward. The speaker said we need to have a dialogue on race, gender, and class to try to set things right.
Thank you, John. Tony?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that when I was living in Austin, I was a education director at Mexicarte Museum there in downtown Austin, and they have an annual Day of the Dead event there. And one of the years I was working there, I organized a panel of scholars to come and I titled the panel "Why Did the Dead Come Back?" and just had different scholars talking about different things around Day of the Dead and around indigenous ancestry that Mexicans obviously have. And one of the scholars I remember, just to I was reminded by, I think Michael's comment, or maybe he's gone now. Um, One of the scholars was talking, he specialized in ancient Mexican history. And he was talking about very specifically about how I mean, and it's just sort of part and parcel, part of the racism used against Mexicans, people of Mexican descent, is what they like to say about, Europeans like to say about the Aztecs. There's sort of these kind of white supremacist critiques that they have of these cultures. Oh, they're so terrible, and all this, stuff with, ripping hearts out of people, and oh, how scary and terrible these people were, without understanding their cultures, what they were doing, what those things meant to them. And this coming from people from Europe who show up, having their own history of, burning witches, and people who showed up in this part of the world slicing the breasts off of women who were breastfeeding their children because they didn't see the native indigenous women as human. These are the people that were critiquing what the Aztecs did. So again, a lot of what we know about these histories in and of themselves is presented in a very racist way. The Spanish came and they burned the texts. We would know so much more about those cultures if they hadn't destroyed, a lot of that ancient knowledge and wisdom in what was the part of Americas with some of the biggest population centers in all of the Americas in that part. So just to sort of remind that there's even the things that people think they know, there's so much distortion. A lot of it has to do with what sources were left available, who got to write the histories, who got to hand those histories down, who got to be the historians. And being a person of Mexican descent, I can say one of the biggest difficulties for me in dealing with the history of the United States that gets repeated quite often by people who grew up and were indoctrinated in this kind of standard white supremacist history that this other gentleman was speaking about in the TED Talk, is that they have still a very United States nation state kind of sense of what that history was about, and they don't take the larger picture of what happens, the experience that happens across the Americas, the kind of experiences that the indigenous people had in the US versus what they had in Mexico versus, all kinds of other regions and different. And you have to go century by century by century, nation by nation by nation, who's doing it, how, and why. And a lot of it still that people repeat is, you wouldn't have, for example, you wouldn't even have Latinos I've said this before, I think in this class at other times, we're the rape victims. We're the descendants of the rape victims of the Europeans. That's who we are. That's why you have mestizos. That's why we're mixed. And in sort of white supremacist, version that kind of white supremacy that was created in the United States didn't know what to deal with us, right? We're considered the mongrel races. I'm all of this in quotes. So anyway, I just beg all of you to take even a further bigger step back and don't just fit in that box of what US history is, because think about history. Modern history comes out of the creation of nation states, which is a 19th century phenomenon, and only from the 19th century phenomenon. And those boundaries that you study history with, those borders and those lines, keep out a much more complex, longer history, don't give credence or any kind of sense of the diversity of the European cultures themselves and all their kind of conquests and issues and what all they brought to it. But they also don't make any sense for the people of the Americas from tip to bottom. So anyway, just some thoughts.
Will has something to say. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Will. Speak to the Al so they can hear you.
Okay, so he talked about, all this happened in the past, but it is still happening in the present. So yesterday, someone shared a video of the president, and he said that we did not steal the land. This country did not do that. He said, you can't be American and say that you're a Marxist if you say that America took the land, So he kind of put people in a position where you have to either choose American, but you can't believe that the land was stolen. So he was giving them you can't be both, right? You can't recognize. But what he's talking about is, we don't get recognition of all these atrocities in the past from the government, right? It's all swept under the rug, and that's where we're stuck at. So that's kind of where I'm stuck, right? Because how can I love this country given all the atrocities to our people? And they don't even recognize it. Even the upper government, that's just my feeling.
And
Yeah, I think, wow, this reminds me of a lot of things, and I love everything the guy said, and for sure, look, going back to Ginsburg's decision on the Supreme Court, it seemed like they were caught maybe the ones with conscience were caught in a little bit of a bind. What do we do now? How do we, if we say we're going to reconciliate, we're going to change the Supreme Court, all the court decisions to then, we now have to almost beg the question, are we going to give all our lands back? Are we going to pay them a certain amount of money? So I can see the quagmire that Ginsburg was in. I also kind of agree with Michael in the sense that we ought to know our bad history. There's for sure that. But where do we go from here? And I think that's a real valid question. We can go back, and I think from my point of view, I like to be reminded time and time and time again through this TED Talk, through what Tony said, is that we've got a lot of work to find out about our own history. And I must admit that I'm rather lazy in going back and looking at all that stuff. But when you process it right now, I think we're really stuck, other than to admit that we're wrong. And as soon as we as a nation do that, you're going to have a lot of people saying, well, we can't go back and repay those people. So I guess it's really a conflict for me. Where do you go? I do want to know more about the history, and Tony brings that up. And I think the TED Talk was wonderful in reminding us of what that was all about. But where do we go from here? That's a good question.
Thank you. Joe?
Michael and other speakers, Mark Charles laid out, we have this huge problem and there's not a solution to it. But what we could do is fortify the walls we have now, the Civil Rights Act, diversity, equity, inclusion, make them stronger. Whether that gets through the Senate, would require 60 votes, it's very, very questionable unless the Republican blow up the filibuster, and then it'd be very possible, just fortifying rights that everyone has. And actually giving more protection and more, I guess, preference to the people who have been wronged. The blacks and the indigenous people and just, I think that the laws need to be strengthened there, but whether that's possible or not, but that could be a solution.
Thank you. Yes, sir. And then Tony comes after this, Jim.
I try to make it quick because there's a lot of things I'd like to say. My name is Freedom Noble. I am mostly white, Irish. My grandmother was Cherokee. All the tribes are my brothers and sisters, my friends. I feel very deeply about all this. I think a lot of Mark Charles. I think one thing that people need to realize, it's got to start with love and forgiveness and understanding of maybe other people you may not understand as white people. You need to understand Native American people and what's happened. It's very important. It's really important for all of us because we're all related, really. We're all our relations. And I think that's really where it starts when we start making decisions about reparations and all that, which that's another deal. But I'm just talking about starting out with love and forgiveness and understanding and maybe, if you get a chance, go to a powwow or find Native American people, listen to their stories, listen to what they've done. I know so many people that served in the military and we just crapped all over Native American people, but they always stood up for their country. But anyway, I'll try to be quieter and wrap this up. But I see so much hatred today, and I've seen things just lately where people have said things about, I know what the president said, and to me, it's like a knife just cuts my heart and bleeds. And America is falling so far away. And we really, instead of having this bad attitude of we need to listen to Native American people, we have something to learn from our brothers and sisters, and there's wisdom and knowledge there. Because remember this, the earth is our mother. From the dust we came, and I'll finish this up, with the dust we came and the dust we will return. The earth is our mother, and God is our father or mother. God is not male or female, but has attributes of both. God is spirit, and it's the spirit that moves through all things and all the universe. One of these days I will die, and it's soon. I am 70. I will be with my friends, Larry, Ronnie, Durham, and Barb Bear, and all my brothers and sisters. I'm sorry, I'm too emotional, and I'm gonna be quiet, but it starts with love. It starts with listening. It starts with maybe let's just calm our attitudes about things, because none of us are God. We always think we're God. We always have opinions, but maybe sometimes we need to be quiet and listen to the spirit, listen to the wind. A lot of Native American people saw God is the wind. There's something to that, the Holy Spirit. I will be silent. Thank you all very much.
I also have to thank you for sharing your heart with us this morning. I wish we could be there to give you a hug or pastoral response, but I just want to say thank you for your courage to say that this morning, Freedom. Thank you. Let's see, Tony.
Yeah, what I wanted to say actually was perhaps just more poetically stated, but just sort of a reminder that, quite often it's easy to fall into the trap of just talking about land as property, but land is culture, land is spirituality, land is the environment, the ecosystem, the world that we live in, and, all of that. And so it's important when having these kind of discussions to not just talk about, stolen and property and all that kind of thing, but to have that larger sense as well of what land really is and what we share in common. That's all.
Thank you, Tom. John, you have about 30 seconds.
Yes, I would like to follow up what the gentleman just said about we are all related. And I tried to put in the chat, could not do that. The powerful Lakota phrase Mataquiasan translates to all my relations. We are all related, reflecting the deeply held indigenous worldview of interconnectedness. Humans, animals, plants, earth, cosmos are all linked in one sacred web of life.
And John, tell us the native land in the Craggy Gardens, please, the scene behind you. I believe that's Cherokee.
Yes, it was originally Cherokee and where you and I grew up.
Thank you, John. We have 30 seconds. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so Canada was mentioned as one of the countries that's done a lot of talking about this.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what they are doing?
I will be glad to bring that to you next week because I think it's an important topic, much farther along than we are in this
Yes.
country. Thank you, Lynn,
Yes,
for
they are.
mentioning that. Alex,
I think I've heard a number of times people say, well, what do we do? What are we gonna do? What do we do? So that's my question to the dozen people here and the people are, what do we do? What's next? Where do we go from here? What do we do?
you hold on to that question
Okay,
because we got to do a little more work on that, all right?
Sure.
Next week, we'll pick that up. We gotta go, Joe. What's
Just real quick, Bob needs some help putting this room back the way it was, so if we can stay a few minutes afterwards, that would be tremendous.
Thank you all online. We will see you next week. I'll send out some readings and links and everything.
Thank you, everyone.
Rick,
Thank
thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was
John
wonderful.
Griswold, probably, he's an expert at that, but taking the helms and just the.
Chair off.